Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special meeting of Brant County Council. I'm just finishing off my butter tart. Attendance has been taken, and Councillor Chambers isn't with us right now. He might be coming in later, and he might not. Everyone else is here. So attendance has been taken, which takes us to the second piece on our agenda, which is the approval of the agenda. We're not supposed to really add anything to the agenda when it's a special meeting, but if anyone has anything that needs to be wound up before the end of the year, if you want to add it now, that would be fine. Seeing none, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Coleman, that the County of Brant Special Council Agenda and Addendum for December 21st, 2023 be approved.
Any other questions, concerns, additions? Seeing none, call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Takes number 3 on the agenda, which is the pecuniary interest. If this agenda brings up any pecuniary interest that involves you, please let me be the first one to know. Which takes us to number 4 on the agenda, which is the staff reports. 4.1.1 is the presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Council. I appreciate the time. Would you like me to share my screen, or are you going to move the slides forward?
You can share your screen, please.
Okay, thank you. Tell me when you see it.
I see it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, not only just to share the results, but for the project. And I will try to be brief so there's time for questions. I'd like to just outline kind of what we're going to share this morning. The first part I'd like to share is the whole reason behind asset management from a kind of higher level, provincial and federal level. Having an asset management plan is by far an excellent practice for the county, but without it, your gas tax and other funding opportunities are diminished, because these opportunities only come forward if you have an asset management plan, and therefore it's a very important thing. Ontario, there's Regulation 588/17 that indicates the need for an asset management plan, and we try to follow the requirements for that regulation within our asset management plan for core assets. Some of the benefits are probably self-evident, but it's a great tool for planning, for including within budgets, budget deliberations, and conversations. But it's really only as good as the data you provide into it. And it's a dynamic process, because as your assets change, as information changes, the asset management plan also would be changing. So it's a dynamic process. It happens. We were provided data and we respond to that data. Just as a note, there is a small, short document called Ontario Building Together Guide. And this guide is actually a small outline of asset management, maybe around 30, 40 pages long. But it's very, very good. And the reason I bring it up is because I try to share this, and there's a link that council can have if you touch on the photo here, or this image in this PowerPoint, it'll take you right to the link to the Ontario documentation. But it's a great guide for asset management, kind of giving you a brief outline. Our asset management plan was, as I mentioned, for core assets, the county cores assets, roads, bridges, culverts, stormwater assets, as well as, so those are taxpayer supported, ratepayers supported water assets and wastewater assets. And this is a combined project. We estimated conditions in some cases, and we also looked at levels of service and risk, and I'll get into some of those topics in a few minutes, and compile an asset strategy. The first step of an asset management plan is to review the assets for the county, and upon initial review, we started this project near the end of 2021, but the first thing we did is we reviewed the assets, or the information on the assets provided to us by the county, and we saw that there were a lot of gaps and a lot of differences between what finance had and what public works had. And upon discussions with the county staff, we understood that the county was going through a process of implementing a work management system. And our advice to the county was, you really need to consolidate one asset data set, or one asset inventory, before you implement this work management system. And to do that is going to take some work, and the county, I guess, listened to our suggestion and went back and started working on integrating and creating this one unique asset data set inventory. Once that was returned to Burnside, we then jumped into working on this asset management plan. We still found some gaps, and we still found some things that we had to make approximations on. So all of that data was provided back to the county, highlighted so that they can review, and your data should only get better and better as time moves on. So we utilize the road study that the county has done in 2022 with an update in 2023, a brief minor update, bridge inspections which were completed in 2021, and various county documents, and a big input was county staff. In general, this graph will show you how an asset degrades over time. And what we're trying to show here is the condition of that asset over time as it degrades. And there's a point which is highlighted in red here, what we call the minimal performance level. So you really don't want to go below this performance level, because then your risk on those assets increases substantially. Increase of potential failure, increase of potential consequences of an asset failure. And you want to stay above that to maintain a good level of service. So really trying to identify the condition of an asset, which was provided for by the bridge study and the road study, that really helps really to define how much more life is left in that asset. And is there any way, what are the options of improvements or some kind of capital improvements to those assets to try to even extend that life further? In other words, trying to get the best value out of that investment in creating that asset in the first place. So the goal is, how do we extend the life cycle of these assets to keep them at that level of service that is beneficial to the public. So when you look at a summary of all the data, you have a replacement cost of $1.8 billion of tax supported assets. And that's your bridges, your roads, and your stormwater assets. And when you look at a weighted average, and I caution a weighted average, but we need to summarize it somehow. And a weighted average is a very good way to do that. It indicates that those tax supported assets are in good condition. So, you know, what that tells you at a high level is you're taking care of your assets. You're investing in them and you're moving forward. A bit of a concern is the weighted average of useful life. It's a 70-year useful life. That's great. But you have 39 years remaining. So that means you're kind of at that halfway point. And at that halfway point in that asset life cycle, you're looking at, okay, we're going to have to start looking at making more investments in these assets to try to make sure that they maintain a level of service. And at this point, at looking at your assets, there is low risk. You have a low risk. So all in all, a very good report card. This slide just shows you a distribution of replacement costs based on 2023 values of your assets and tax supported assets. Asphalt surface roads being your number one asset type. When you look at the ratepayers' assets, so the water assets, these assets are in average condition. Again, weighted average. $264 million replacement cost total. Useful life, when you take, again, a weighted average of this, is approximately 59, 60 years. And again, you're at the halfway point here as well with regards to your asset life cycle based on a weighted average. Moderate risk. And I would suggest the moderate risk is because water is such a higher risk potential. Wastewater has good condition. And what we're seeing here is based on the data, your 94-year cycle, weighted average again, and you've got 63 years remaining. In other words, what that's telling me at a very high level is that your wastewater assets are younger or newer than your water assets. And that means you're going to have more life, and therefore your risk is, again, moderate, but that's because of potential risk on these assets. Again, a distribution of both those asset types, categories. Levels of service. I wanted to talk a bit more about levels of service, and I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but this is a very important aspect, because if you don't invest in maintenance, and a lot of municipalities in the past, this is probably the very first thing that councils like to cut costs on and try to defer maintenance. The more you do that, the more challenge you have with trying to maintain those assets to give you that full life cycle that you were expecting in the first place. This next slide will show you what I mean by that. The blue line identifies if you have an asset and you let it just run out its cycle without investing into it, maintenance or capital improvements over its cycle, it will last you a whole lot less. If you give it small investments of money over time, those smaller investments of money will give you a longer life cycle and give you a higher level of service to the public on those assets. This is a key and a very good thing to look at and understand. We went and we tried to analyze all of this data. And again, it's a snapshot of data at one time. As you move forward, you'll get more condition information, more information, feedback from staff, and this will improve the not only confidence, but also level of assurance of this asset management plan. Risk is a big deal because we all take risks on everything. We try to prioritize everything we do. And that's what council does. They try to get information and make decisions based on what is the best decision for the county at the time. So here, risk, we've taken into account the probability of failure and the consequence of failure. And we tied all of that into our calculations for the asset strategy. This bar graph shows you over the 10-year period of the project period that we were to analyze. Here is your costs or your needs identified based on all of those inputs, level of service, risk, condition, into the final strategy. What I understand, this information is then going to be given to Watson, or already has, and Watson will be providing a total financial strategy for the county. These are the water and wastewater distribution of needs that we've identified based on the information provided. So our recommendations are that council receive and approve the 2023 County of Brant Asset Management Plan for core assets, that council consider the 2023 Asset Management Plan for core assets during annual budget deliberations, and that the plan be updated as required and as county priorities change. And that would be my presentation. And I'm happy to either answer questions now or wait until Clint has delivered his report.
Does council have questions now? Do you want it, Councilor Miller?
Yeah, got a couple, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay, on this report. So, hold on a second here. First question, 242 million over 10 years. If I divide that by 10, it's 24 million. For some reason, one of the reports says 22 million a year for tax-supported core infrastructure. Are you aware of, do you know why there's a difference of 2 million a year?
Which report was that?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't believe that might be a question for Clint.
Okay, I'll have to bring that up later, because and my apologies too, because I read about 4 different reports for today. Okay, we'll leave it at that. 242 million, and I assume those are in 2023 dollars. So as inflation goes up, we would adjust those for inflation.
Actually, that is the total over the 10-year period, and that is inflated dollars over that 10-year period.
Okay, fair enough. A lot of what you said, I mean, at the end of the day, nothing new under the sun. We should all know that if you repair things, if you maintain things in good order, they last longer. We got that. You change the oil on your vehicle so the engine performs longer. You have a leak in your roof, you fix it so you don't get water damage. So that, I mean, a lot of that makes sense. What I found really interesting, and this is on page 10 of your report, where you show the asset condition over time. And it looks to me like for about the first 2/3 of an asset's life, it's in very good condition. And it's that final third where you start to see, it almost looks like a Seneca cliff there. You see quite a drop off. And I guess that's how a human ages too, because you see more seniors at the doctor's office than anyone else. Given the fact that a lot of our assets are a little long in the tooth, do you see that as a bit of an issue?
Yes, I do. However, let me give you a bit of a caveat. So when you have like you do, and you do very well, the road needs studies and your bridge inspections, what you'll find, so over a 10-year period, our project period was a 10-year period, but we had information on the road needs study that was really only 9 years of the 10-year period. And what you may find is you go back and you inspect these assets, and when you do appropriate maintenance, you may find that those assets, some will extend out longer. And then on the other hand, let's take a road for instance. If you have a road that might have some light vehicle traffic uh, travel on it year after year, that road might last longer than expected. However, you get a change in that vehicle traffic, and now you have heavy trucks going on that road, many heavy trucks going on that road, and that's going to reduce the time, your life cycle. So having that inspection is good because it'll give you a better understanding of what that remaining life is going to be. But I agree with your concern or your point that as your assets get older, they may, you're going to have to open up the pockets and have to do something or make sure that you have money in reserves to take care of things. There are some remedies that can try to extend life. For example, some water or stormwater type networks, you can line them. But if you don't line them in time, if you let them degrade too far, then that even trying to line them will not extend the life that much. And it might be beyond that, what I call that red line of minimum level of service.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. That's good. Um, yeah, no, I like your point too. Of you think an asset's good for so long, and then all of a sudden you see the road, you see heavy usage, and that I would call those gravel pits in our county. But thank you very much for the answer.
I'm going to go to Rob Walton first and then to Councillor Bell.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council. I'd like to thank Ernest for his presentation. We've been working with him for the last almost 2 years on this, and I think we've come up with a good product here. Our asset management plan, it is a living document, and hopefully forever we're improving it as we go along. We've got staff here working on this. There was a question asked there about the difference between the total 244 million, I believe it was, and the 22 million per year, whatever. Really, what we need to do now over the next period of time is take the information from this report and develop it better into the long-term financial plan. You're seeing a draft of that today, but we haven't had a big chance to do that. And clearly for this year's budget, we used all of the roads need studies and the bridge need studies and whatever that we had. We didn't even have this back in August when we were starting the budget process. So it's a long process. We're in a great position now. If council approves this today, we do get to check that box with the province for the core assets, and then we do need to then move on. The next step is to finalize the non-core assets by next summer, and then use this data to finalize the long-term financial plan and work on the future budgets. And as they say, this is a continuum. The process is continuous, and it'll get better. But today we'll be able to check off the first box of that, and staff's pretty happy about that for sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Walton. Councillor Bell, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ernest, thank you for that presentation. A couple of questions. I like the way you use a weighted average to give us a broad sense of how good our asset base is, but we do need to be specific at times. And just earlier this week, we had a group of residents coming in to complain about Cleaver Road Bridge. I just use that as an example. It's suddenly kind of popped up as a problem, and it's causing us a little bit of an issue. So I wonder, do you have a sense of which assets are truly critical to the county and what condition they are in? I'll give another example. What would happen if the high-level bridge in Paris failed? And is that in good condition? I use that as an example. There are more.
Yeah, very good question. And yes, every single asset is analyzed. So a complete asset inventory was delivered to the county staff. It's kind of our working documents that have been delivered to staff, and staff have all of the analysis and all of the information all within spreadsheets and things like that they can now use and move forward. So whenever conditions are assessed and change, that can be updated in that asset inventory and provide feedback on some of those critical assets. So yes, this is high level and provided a weighted average. However, every little detail, every asset has an analysis on it and is identified when it needs to be replaced. And that's how those totals for that replacement were achieved. If I can add one note to the initial question, where the 2.2 million per year came from, that is uninflated total. I just looked at the tables, and that's where that difference between the 2.4 million per year and the 2.2 million per year.
Yeah, thank you. I'm through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not quite sure I got the answer I was hoping to hear, which was all of our truly critical assets are in as good a condition as the average, or even better. Do you want to comment on that?
The only comment I can make without jumping in and looking at data is that a weighted average, and the weighting was based on replacement costs. So your more expensive assets took priority with regards to that weighting to create that average. But those weighted averages can be a little bit deceiving, as you point out, because there are some assets in there that definitely need attention and need either improvements or replacement, and that is for sure.
Okay, thank you. Second question, if I may. We talked about 242 million of capital needs. Does your report distinguish between what is truly capital and what is operating costs? Because we have a lot of operating costs that we use to maintain our facilities. Is there another sum of money over and above the 242 million that you could characterize to give us the total cost of maintaining our facilities over the long run?
So we did not do the non-core assets like your facilities or the tax-based ones. We did do include facilities for the water and wastewater assets. However, yes, we did have many discussions with staff with regards to operating costs and where improvements or additional funds are required for operating costs, and they're included in this study. And those numbers are also generated. The additional, I'm looking at it right now, the additional for tax supported assets, you're looking at $1 million, close to $1 million required over that 10-year period in additional operating costs. What we would call kind of maintenance and additional maintenance and level of service type costs. We did break out capital and improvement, or what we call rehabilitation of assets. Those are broken out as well, and they are all totaled into that final number.
Okay, thank you.
Does staff want to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to speak to Councillor Bell's talk about Cleaver Road Bridge, and actually that's a good example. It's a good thing to bring up and very top of mind right now since we had the delegation on Tuesday night. So actually, what's happened with Cleaver Road Bridge is not a surprise. You know, we do the 2-year inspections. That bridge has been posted, I believe, 18 tons for some period of time, so we knew that it was not in great shape. And when we did the 2-year inspection this year, the consultant came back and said, this has to be posted at a mouth that's less than 10 tons, and so it's not safe for many vehicles to cross it. In addition to that, in the transportation master plan, when we looked at all the bridges, we looked at all of the condition of all the bridges, what the connectivity of the roads was, and we came up with a plan of 13 bridges which could be considered for closure, as we talked about on Tuesday night. And in November at the policy meeting, we did council did pass a procedure where we would talk with the public about what we're going to do with those bridges. So I think that's an excellent example where we've actually been working towards, and you know what we need to do is better get this information into the hands of the residents, and that's what the whole communication protocol that was passed by council in November is about. And you know, as we go on, you know, we'll get better at that. But as I say, I think this is a good example of that bridge is not such a big surprise, really. Thank you.
Through the mayor, in addition to what Rob has said, the reason why the sudden closure of the Cleaver Road Bridge was also that there was an accident on Highway 24 and traffic was rerouted or detoured away from it without really indicating where they were to go. But we realized when that happened, transport trucks were going across that bridge, and because we knew that would happen, that also fed into the whole idea is we cannot maintain that bridge because there's a huge liability if that continues to happen for us to maintain. Like Rob said, if it goes below 10 tons, you need well above that for a transport truck. So that was part and parcel of why that was done the way it was, to ensure that our liability was limited. In addition to what you're asking about other assets and everything, like because we do, as was mentioned in the report and the presentation, because we do our 2-year review of all of our road surfaces and the OSIMs get done every 2 years, staff review all that information and we stay on top of it, and we're doing the maintenance and the rehabilitations. I believe we're very close to everything that's actually noted in the OSIM that needs to happen in the 10 years is actually within the 10-year plan for us that we have shown. So all of that maintenance, so the high level bridge in Paris, we're on top of everything that needs to be done. So just so you're aware, and Rob said, Cleaver Road fell into a category of it went down the right process based on other things that occurred.
Just a comment, if I may. Glad to hear it, Mark. Thank you. I think the residents of the county will be glad to hear that all the critical assets are under control. I think the interesting thing about Cleaver Road Bridge, it doesn't fit the nice curve. It kind of comes along like that and goes down. It wasn't a nice gentle run off to the end of its life. There was actually a cut-off which was created by other factors. And I think that brought to my mind, are we starting the process of repair and renovation soon enough? Should we be thinking about just taking the curve that Burnside had? They say basically when you reach that red level, red dotted level when you get to the end of Fair, should we be thinking about starting our process when we get to the start of Fair, so we never actually end up in the position that we go below that red line? Because there is a timeline. I mean, you know how long it takes to get some of the approvals we need to do the smallest and simplest of things. Sometimes it's years to get approval from whoever we need approval from to repair a road, to change a roadway, to take a bridge out of service and repair it. So do we have the right lead time? That's, I guess, my question.
Through the mayor to council. Again, yes, with the OSIM, we are doing anything like the things that are noted in it, the major rehabs, minor rehabs, all of that, it's all being included in the 10-year plan for us to actually do the work. Cleaver Road Bridge was at the end of its life. Because it's an earth-filled arch, the type of bridge that it is, it's a major rehab replacement. There's not like minor stuff that can be done to like fix the issues that were going on with it. It had already had its rehabs and everything else. It was at the end of its life. So as much as you said it got to the end of the curve and it dropped, we were taking it for as long as we possibly could along that curve until we got to where we were. There was nothing else we could do. Like it's a major cost and replacement at this point. It's not a rehab if we go down that route. There's just not enough life in it or structure left to actually do a rehab. It's only a single lane bridge. Again, we don't maintain single lane bridges. There's a number of things that would happen. So it made it to the end of its life. We did the best we could to get it to that point.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller, you're next.
One question for Mark while he's there, and then I'd like to ask our presenter from Burnside a question. To you, Mark, going through the Burnside report, it talks about level of service. It says, this is a very specific question, maintain good bridge condition with one bridge having a load limit. Is that one bridge throughout the whole county? Is that our...
Through the council, I would have to double check that, but that could be the case. I'm not aware of many that are.
That's what it says in our report. Current level of service, maintain good bridge condition with one bridge load limit. So like I said, I didn't know if that was for the whole county or what. So if you could find out.
I will look into that for you.
Thank you. And three, Mr. Mayor, to Burnside. I'm going to ask this of when we look at our long-term financial plan, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about risk management, risk mitigation. You know, you have a plan, and a plan's only as good until you get punched in the head for the first time. So we have market fluctuation, inflation, unexpected life events. There's a lot of things that are thrown at you. How do we manage the risks associated with those unknowns? Like outside of ensure your reserves are fully funded, making sure we get the inspections done, having good information. Any other thoughts on how we can manage and mitigate risks for our assets in our asset plan?
I would suggest that, doing those things that you've mentioned, that's really all you really can do. If you wanted to do more, the only other suggestion I would have, and I've talked to other municipalities about this, is, and I believe as asset management further evolves and we get better at this, I believe you're going to want to then look at kind of the spatial implications of that risk, where they are, where your assets are, what the implications are to communities and things like that. So, for example, I'll just have one example, and you've been talking about some of this already with regards to a bridge. So we were doing an asset management plan for a municipality that had an island, and they were developing a community on that island. Well, a risk would be if they only had one bridge to get people on and off that island, that would be an extremely high risk on that bridge. So that risk level is further enhanced. Now, you have two bridges on that island. Now you've moderated that potential risk, and now you have two bridges. Yes, more cost, but you've lowered your risk. No different than in call it a water treatment plant. If you only had one pump and that pump breaks down, you're in big trouble. So the risk is high. So you want to further look at all of those details around risk and assess, no different than condition, assess a prioritized risk level on some assets. That might be something that I would suggest in the future as this matures.
Okay, thank you. That's a good answer. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion to receive the presentation, Councillor Coleman and Councillor Pierce. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too, sir. Which takes us to 4-1-2. And Councillor Garneau, you have that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Kyle, that the County of Brant, the County Asset Management Plan for core assets be approved by the County of Brant Council as required under Ontario Regulation 588-17 for submission to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and further that the recommendations of the Asset Management Plan, including the development of a 10-year capital budget, utilization of risk-based prioritization, and an increase of asset condition knowledge be incorporated into the 2024 and future years budget process, and further that staff be directed to complete the asset management plan for the non-core assets by the June 2024 deadline from the province, and that the recommendations contained in the asset management plan for core assets be referred to Watson and Associates Limited for the consideration of the long-term financial plan.
Everyone's clear? All those, Councillor Miller?
You're taking questions and comments?
Yeah.
I'll support the recommendation. I think most of us will. To me, this is what it's all about. If we're not providing our core mandate of good services, we're not doing our job, and I've said it before. So I like the recommendation. I like the fact that will be in our budget. To me, the budget should start with this, and then everything else we look at individually. But I like it, and I hope we support it.
Thank you. Any other quick, Councillor Bell?
I think Mr. Through you, I guess, to Clint or whoever is taking the questions. You're saying here that the information in this report has been shared with Watson as they work the long-term financial plan. How much of the 242 million is included in the long-term financial plan, and how much more is to go in?
Who knows that answer? Mr. Walton, are you still there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. I'm assuming Heather Boyd is there. These plans, you know, there's the heavy deadline for getting them done to come to this meeting. The asset management plan is complete. I'm not sure that some of this information was forwarded to Watson's over time, but what you're looking at today is a draft long-term financial plan as far as I'm concerned, and there is more work to be done with that to finalize this up as we go forward past 2024. Clearly, our 2024 budget is already prepared, and as the new documents next year for the next ones come up, that this information be used to improve all of that, and the next draft of the long-term financial plan. Heather, are you there?
Through the mayor. So our current long-term financial plan and the draft documents preparing for budget has a significant component towards the asset management plan. In excess of what they say the average is going to have to be for each year, although recognizing there's a bit of a backlog of projects that need to go forward in 2024. So is every single project addressed in the long-term financial plan at this point? Possibly not. I know we focused a lot on the tax-based things, and so some of the rate-based things, the water and the wastewater, those kind of projects probably have not been fully captured at this time.
Thank you, Heather. But if you're saying 90% of that 242 million is already in the long-term financial plan, I'll use 90% as a marker for most of it. If you're saying that, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I would say that's probably fair.
Councillor Pierce, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very quickly on page, I guess it's 13 of that report, in the top paragraph, it says, great efforts were undertaken by county staff in Burnside to create a complete core asset data set. Gaps in this data have been found and estimates were made. Is it like one or two gaps? Was there a whole bunch of gaps? And those gaps, are they on the same type of infrastructure or same area of the county? I'm just curious if we can expand on that a bit.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Pierce. When we get looking at the data, one of the worst, or one of the data sets that needed a lot of improvement was the storm sewers, and there was a lot of work done on that. The other things you get into are things like water main and estimating the ages of some of it, and some of it's very easy to estimate, and some of it is very difficult. And so you do the best you can with that, and you put in estimates for that. And every asset management plan is the same. So I don't know. The Runas can help us out and say where our data is. I would say our data should be at a sort of like a 95% level. Now would be my guess, but that's a number off the top of my head.
If you'd like my comment, I would say that Rob is absolutely correct. The real challenge was, what is the age of these assets, especially when there wasn't a condition assessment of the stormwater assets. So to get a condition value on it, you had to utilize an age-based kind of assessment. So you look at that curve and you're there, okay, based on our knowledge of what these pipes and these systems, what the life cycle should be, our guess of, well, it was constructed maybe this year, and we're guessing what the condition is. That has to be cleaned up, and that will improve your confidence in the assessment.
Councillor Pierce?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And just a quick follow-up. So it's more on the edge of not necessarily knowing when some of these assets were built, as opposed to not knowing the assets are there. Is that
correct?
Fair? Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other comments or concerns before we call the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And carried, which takes us to 4.2.1. That's Watson Associates. Welcome.
Thank you for that. Members of council, Mr. Mayor, staff, always a pleasure to be before you. We're happy to be here to give you a preliminary assessment of the long-term financial plan. At this particular point, as noted, we've just received the information for the asset management. We are in progress of doing the development charge study, and as I understand, there's a water and a wastewater financial plan being prepared. So right now, staff thought it would be important to, at the beginning of the process, have preliminary discussions, give you our preliminary, at a very high level, thoughts or perspectives. And then from that, we'll be back later on mid-year to give you really the completion of our analysis. There we go. Oops, go back. It responds very slow. There we go. So, my staff say I'm technologically impaired, and I'm just demonstrating that they're correct. Okay, there we go. Jeez. So, just at a very high level, what I'd like to walk you through today is set out here. First off is just the scope of the assignment that we've worked with staff. And then from there to overview for you what the long-term financial plan framework encompasses. And really, for the most part, that's what the rest of the bullets are. We talk about the growth forecast because we're going out over a 10-year planning horizon. As we're talking at this point solely on the tax side, then obviously we need to assess some of the inputs, such as the growth occurs, how much new assessment will you be generating, because, you know, as your operating expenditures, capital expenditures go up, the denominator is the assessment. So we'll take a look at the impacts on the taxpayer. We'll look at the operating budget and the capital budget, and at the end of the that assessment, take a look at the ultimate tax rate impacts. For today, I'll go through on a very preliminary basis all of those items, and then we'll talk about where we're going to go from here. So the long-term financial plan, as I've noted, really takes a look at identifying the capital infrastructure over time. Capital infrastructure includes the asset management, as you've gone through, and it also includes your new assets that will arise through growth. We capture much of it through the development charge study, but the development charge study, because it doesn't embrace all of the services, there may be some gaps, and we'll look to those ineligible services. We'll look to identify capital needs arising from those as well. We put together, from the capital, we give you the operating costs. So some of your current operating expenditures, your programs, they'll naturally increase over time because of inflation. But then as growth occurs, you're going to be layering on top of that additional programs in order to accommodate that growth. Good example would be as soon as you're constructing new subdivisions, now you have to be plowing those new roads. You're going to have to be assuming those roads, maintaining them, etc. Recreation side, you're going to have to add additional programs. And even though you do have some offsetting revenues, normally they're not fully recoverable, so they will have an impact ultimately on your tax base. So we try and assess all of these different factors, and at the end of the day, pull them into a net impact. Just on the last two bullets, if I would highlight, number one, we will be commenting on the municipality's debt capacity, but that needs to be looked at based on not only the tax-supported work that we'll do, but also the water and wastewater work that will be put forward and the development charge study. Even though we do the calculations of the development charges and we say over time, here's the charge you should be imposing, things such as water, wastewater, storm, and to some extent roads, they have to be built even before the growth occurs because you can't get a building permit until you have the water and the wastewater and your stormwater services in place. So we'll be looking at those impacts as well and commenting back. The last one is just to identify that, and I think Rob Walton said that a lot of these documents are not static, they are living documents and they need to be updated over time. So in conjunction with staff, the work that we do here will continue on into the future and help to lay out the foundation for long-term capital and operating budget planning. As I've noted, this is preliminary, so we haven't got all the inputs. We've done some preliminary work, which I'll explain, and we've made some very high-level assumptions. Those will be refined as we move forward over the coming months. We have the draft capital budget and draft operating budget for 2024. We will identify the direct impacts for that. That's something that you'll be talking about in the very near future. So we're laying out preliminary impacts, but obviously you still have the opportunity to go through and have your review and your input into the ultimate budgets. And as I've noted, the water and wastewater financial plan will, as I understand, I think it'll be back before you in February. So that'll be a key item for your review. The schematic here is just to provide a very high level overview of the work that we do. And if I start at the very top and on the left-hand side, you can see that the two very dark boxes really are talking about the growth. They talk about the lands that are going to be developed over time, and within those lands, the proposed population and employment that we'll be expecting over the next 10 years If I drop down first to the bottom, since we already talked about infrastructure, and we look at the bottom very dark purplish blobs, there's two issues there. There's the one which is identifying the infrastructure requirements. So some of that comes from the master plans, some of that comes from staff identification, some of these programs you may be advancing. And all these needs are basically what will make up not only the capital budget, but keep in mind as the development proceeds, there's going to be a lot of development, a lot of infrastructure that's constructed by the developers, and they'll be handed over to you. A lot of times you don't realize that even though they build the internal roads, the water mains, the sewers, etc., once you assume them, they become, to some extent, after your last presentation, a long-term liability. You've got to be maintaining them. You have to keep them up to speed. So those quite often you don't see on the books through your capital budget, but as soon as you assume them, they become something that has to be maintained. So we'll look at the infrastructure costs, and the box that's to the right-hand side identifies the financing. So a lot of that will come through capital budget process. Some of it will come through the development charge process. And as I say, some of it will be dedicated. All of that feeds up into that very right-hand side box, the orange box, which talks about the net financial impact. So everything I'm going to talk about at the end of the day, the end point of all of this is to take a look at what the impacts are on the taxpayer. You can see a little line going up from that blue, that dark purple box, little line going up to the green box, which talks about operating expenditures. So there's two boxes there. The one on the bottom identifies that in some instance, the operating costs will be affected by infrastructure. So that could be as soon as you build a new arena, all of a sudden, as soon as you open it up, you got $500,000 of expenditures for operating the chillers. You need staff, you need hydro, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those costs are automatically assumed. And you can even look at that through, as soon as you assume new subdivisions, all of a sudden we have all these operating costs, snow removal, the sidewalk and road maintenance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there will be influences directly as a result of the infrastructure. The top part, the top green box, just talks about there'll be a lot of operating expenditures that are activated as a result of growth. As soon as you have more people, there's more programming, say, in the parks and the recreation area. So now we have to provide more hours of ice time. We have to provide more recreational programs, cultural programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a number of expenditures that will increase naturally as a result of the population, and as well the employment increases. Then we look at the top two orange boxes, and they are the new revenues that'll come. The top one talks about new assessment. So as we build new houses or new businesses, factories, etc., we receive assessment, additional assessment, and through taxation that helps to generate one aspect of the revenue. And the other orange box, the lower one, talks about non-tax revenues. So you have fees, fines, fares, etc. So all of the operating revenues that are generated through, say, the recreational programs, selling of documents, fines, etc. We also try and analyze all of those. So we take all of these boxes, and as I say, they all culminate on the very right-hand side, which is talking about the financial impact of all of this, these programs. Now I'm going to take just very quickly at a high level, I'm going to go back and I'm going to just address each one of these boxes, just to give you a bit of a flavor on some of the assumptions that have been generated to date. So if we take a look, at the growth forecast, and that is, as I've noted, at the upper left-hand side, you can see those two boxes. Right now, for the analysis I'll present today, and what we'll be looking at is over the next 10 years, we'd be looking at the development charge growth forecast. You can see on the residential side, which is the top table, We've looked at roughly about 2,400 units being constructed. The highest category is your singles and semi-detached. They represent roughly about 60%. And then you've got townhouses and apartments. In total, that should you should see about another 6,500 people arising from occupancy of those different units. The lower part is talking about your non-residential, so your industrial, your commercial, your institutional, and that should we should see in and around 2.5 million square feet, which translates into roughly about almost 2,900 employees. About 2,100 employees. So with that, there is an impact associated with accommodating those employees and accommodating the population. So we do use these numbers as part of our analysis, both on capital and operating. On the top box, this is new assessment. So I'm going to start at the top.
Excuse me just for a moment.
Oh,
Can we
sorry.
ask questions along the way?
Absolutely. I
Councillor
apologize,
Pierce,
Mr. Mayor.
You're first, then Councillor House.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor, and sorry to interrupt that. But just while you were on that slide, so on page 24, when you're talking about the growth forecast,
Yes.
you talk about persons per unit assumption. To me, when you're talking 3 to 1.87, as we know, and as seems to be the trend, we're getting a lot of multi-generational families moving in. So to me, those numbers are way low. I'm just curious as to, was any of that brought into the discussion when these numbers were assumed? Because even the, I would like to know where they come from, because it's a trend that's going on, and it's happening. It's reality.
It's an excellent question. What we use is StatsCan data, and the most recent, obviously through census, is the 2021. So we've got a very detailed profile specifically for your municipality. And we break it into 5-year blocks. So what was built in the 1 to 5 year, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, so we can track all of that information. From that, and I know this is an occurrence, and we're considering that with all of the forecasts that we're doing. There is a trend, and even in my neighborhood, I live in Bliss Lynch, I can see the multi-generational families and such, but it gets traded off with the fact that we have these newer families coming in, and I built my house 20 years ago. I've got 3 kids. At that particular point, there was 5 of us. At this point in time, there's 2 of us. I haven't killed off my kids. I've encouraged them to leave the nest, just to be clear. Okay. But so what you have in these neighborhoods is, if they're moving into the newer neighborhood, the older neighborhoods, is there's a sustainability level. So as my neighbors, and I've got neighbors that have same situation, kids and stuff, they've moved out, and the houses are tending to recycle. So the recycling, we have families coming in. Now, historically, we may have had newer families coming in with maybe, 2 kids or such. They're coming in a little bit higher with maybe in the range of, 5, 6, 7 individuals, if the house is in like a 4-bedroom and can accommodate it. So that factor is we're starting to see that. These particular numbers, though, are specific to your brand new houses, those that are basically built over the last 10 to 15 years. So these are actual numbers in your situation. But we do monitor at the longer term. That's where we actually see a lot of those families is coming into the older neighborhoods.
Okay, just a follow-up, if I could. And I appreciate that explanation, because what I'm worried about, I'm not worried about it, it's reality. So if these are based on 2021 numbers, all of a sudden if we get, 3 or 4 years down the road, and all of a sudden they're based on, 2024, 2025 numbers, this is going to be like double easily. So I'm worried that we're not, because it's an assumption, I'm worried that we're not, I don't want to say padding it, but increasing those numbers on the assumption of the reality. We know what's happened, even though they're based on 2021 stats, we know over the last couple of years that this is a trend. So I appreciate that explanation, but that kind of worries me.
And as I say, Councillor, that's a very good question. We have a demographic section. We have 11 people that do the growth forecast, monitor. There's not only the StatsCan data, it's to us the definitive information because it's based on census. But there are other sources that we look at. CMHC undertakes annual information. I think the province do collect certain data, but it's not as full as maybe what CMHC does. So we access all of that information in order to carry on and analyze the trends. So based on the best information we have, this particular one, as I say, is solely for the new people in the newer houses.
Right.
But whether there's a decline or whether what we are seeing is that decline in my neighborhood, we're seeing that slow down, and that's something we consider as well.
Okay, thank you.
Now, just to pass on, and I think it's a good question. I got to go one additional step. Quite often when there's the planning for water, sewer, any of the master plans, they consider the reductions over time in the existing houses and such, because what that does is makes room. You know, you get a decline. My kids aren't there in the arenas and stuff. It makes some room for the newer homes for the kids to go in and accommodate it. What you will find over time is that decline isn't going to create as much room. That'll put upward pressure on more infrastructure, new infrastructure to be built to accommodate it. So it'll be a factor to be considered in future master plans.
Right. No, and if I may, Mr. Mayor, yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, we've had the discussion around this table now with, if we look at wastewater, because like in Paris with the sewage plant, you know, the assumptions were over the trend of the years and having these type of numbers in our homes. Now all of a sudden we've got double, triple that in some cases, more water, more flushes, all that kind of stuff. So yes. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably another council discussion session. I think it's our new reality that each of the staff have to deal with, as well as consultants such as myself.
We have a second question from Councillor Howes before you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Councillor Pierce was asking questions about the person per unit assumptions from this chart. My questions are more towards the units themselves. We had the director of planning here a couple weeks ago responding to a question about the number of dwellings that are in the pipeline for the county, and the discussion was talking about the Paris part at that time. And we heard a number of 5,600 roughly, maybe more, dwellings in the pipeline at various stages of approval and appeal. And I'm wondering if the assumptions within this draft growth forecast are saying 2,400, a little less than half of that pipeline number in the next 10 years. And that would actually probably be good news for some of us. But I wonder if it might be too conservative based on what we see coming through the pipeline. And I wonder if you could speak to what some of the realities might be if it doesn't take 20 years for those 5,600 dwellings to come along, how does that impact what you're talking about today?
It's a good question. So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a forecast, so we do our best. But we do consider what's coming through the pipeline. So you consider what's approved and not built, what's draft approved, so that's pending supply. And then we take a look at the applications that are, the staff are monitoring those individuals in hoping to put in a submission for a subdivision or whatever. And then there's the rest of the official plan. We're at the beginning part of the development charge, so these are the first cut at the numbers. We need to consider with that is, number one, what's in the master plans, the water and the wastewater master plans, and then, Parks Rec, etc. A lot of times those are done over 20 years. So, and we consider those as part of the DCs. This is just a 10-year forecast for the long-term financial plan. When we put it all together, if our forecasts are, and this is a question and a challenge that we go at to the board when we do the development charges. How do you know you're 100% accurate? Well, if I was 100% accurate, I'd be in Vegas. So but with being an economist, I have two hands. If it's, if the growth is faster, then what it says as staff monitors is that your 10-year capital budget, or what we put here, maybe that's not a 10-year plan, maybe it's only an 8-year plan. So it provides the opportunity. That's where the financial plans like this allow you the opportunity to accelerate the timing of the works, at least on the capital side. If it's occurring slower, then our 10-year plan maybe is a 12 or a 13-year plan. It allows you, as staff are proceeding through, maybe to slow down the level of constructing new infrastructure, because if you construct it way too soon, you're going to have to fund it some way, which means translates into debt, translates into interest payments on that debt, etc. So that is when we provide these forecasts. It's a basis for staff, led by finance, when they're looking at the operating and the capital budgets, to be monitoring the pace of the development and to be providing you during the budget process whether we should be pulling some projects forward or maybe slowing things down a little bit. So that's why I say these are, and we've made provision with staff to revisit these financial plans. So as things change, you can update. And if you're going out and always looking at a 10-year horizon, you've got the flexibility to accelerate or decelerate your spending and to accommodate the growth.
Any other questions? Seeing none.
Thank you. But please, as we proceed, more than happy to answer the questions. There we go. So I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to move down, even though my initial description I started at the bottom. But looking at what we just provided you, which was the number of units and the square footage of buildings, a natural extension is to take a look at what the assessment arising from that is. And it's not coming. There we go. Once again, I apologize for this being a little small. Keep in mind, these numbers that I'm presenting on average values are based on 2016 assessment data. We would have hoped that MPAC, and there was recommendations that MPAC move along to update these, but I'm sure COVID being one of the major issues, things haven't been updated as of yet. So these are values. Now what we've done with this is we've worked with staff, we've done surveys across the entire municipality, looked at newer units over the last 6-7 years, and identified the average value, the assessment value for those units. So on an average we have, thank you very much. On average we have about 400,000 for singles, about 300,000 for townhouses, and about 280 for apartments. And if we use those planning assumptions on the prior slides, then that would translate into about $876 million of new assessment on the residential side. On non-residential side, we've done the same analysis, and that would give us another $336 million in assessment. So you total them together, we're about $1.2 billion in additional assessment over the 10-year planning horizon. So that will add additional revenue to help facilitate your programs. And if we just provide it on a graphic perspective, you can see your current assessment is the very dark area, and this growth forecast is represented in the green. At the end of the process, if you go from here to the number at the end, it's an average annual increase of 2.1%. So that would be the average amount of assessment.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a question about the average assessment per unit. It's just my observation, and we were chuckling just last week with a couple of extreme examples, that the single and semi-detached homes that have been built, and this is really about new builds, they're quite significantly bigger than what I would say was the average of the older properties in Paris. We had one example last week, it was 8,000 square feet, I think. It was a huge thing. So when you talk about average, are you just assuming the average of what we have today, or are you recognizing that the new building is much bigger than the old building?
Over the last 6 years, we've taken all of the, we've sampled, and it's not just been one subdivision. We've sampled a variety of subdivisions across different areas, right across the municipality. So there are large ones that are being constructed. What we're also experiencing is newer units coming in in order to keep, I guess, pricing competitive, they're reducing the size of it. So on balance, when we've taken a look at all of these, this is the resulting assessment.
Yeah, I really struggle with that because, through you, Mr. Matt, even the smallest new builds, and I'll use Rest Acres Road as an example. We've got some 3-level townhomes there. The smallest unit there, I think, was 1,500 square feet. The average typical 1950s, 1960s ranch bungalow is about 1,200, 1,300 square feet. Every home that gets built is either bigger or substantially bigger than the ones we had before. And my sense is that, and it's good, it should be good news, because I think your curve is probably underestimating the increase in assessed value. So it's to the positive. So and we'll just keep that in the back pocket as a plus that might come along later, maybe.
It's a good point. I think we can step back with planning, because we generated the information through discussions. But there's several hundred units that are in this survey. But it's a good question. Let's see in conversation with planning. Maybe there's something that we may have missed in the averaging of what's coming through the process. I think that's your point, is you may have surveyed, you may have actual data, but maybe, what we've selected over the last 6 years may not be what we're seeing over the next. So that's a good point. We will circle back on that.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, when you look at $400,000, that's 2016 values. It is a little difficult to comprehend, but that's a good point, Councillor. I will look at that. Non-tax, so this is the second orange box. These are your fees, your fines, your fares. So we've pulled all of the information, and what we've done is we've looked at it depending on the type of program. Obviously, if you have things such as conditional grants, we've considered conditional, but if they're unconditional, we wouldn't have included them, because we don't know if those unconditional grants will continue. But then we've looked at recreational fees, and we've looked at a number of different fees, and we've then disaggregated it down to population and employment, and have undertaken analysis. So we would see those non-tax revenues rising at about 3 to 4% over excuse me, annual rate of 3 to 4% after 2024. And you can see, if I just explain the lines, the little green one, that's the inflation, and the additional as a result of growth is that marginal little purple one that's there. Arising from the growth forecast. So we've looked at those two different factors. There's probably a natural increase with inflation, and then we've added the impact of growth.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. I'm struggling with the maths here a little bit. Your second line down says you're assuming 3 to 4% increase post 2024, and then you say, in addition, the non-tax revenues related to population growth will be factored in addition to. Well, I think you just showed us earlier that the population growth is around about 2% per year. So, but then the next line down, you're back to the 3 to 4%. Wouldn't it be more logical to say it's 5 to 6%? And I mean, so again, it's a plus thing for us because there may be more revenues, maybe on the plus side in terms of supply of funding.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the problem of rounding where we may be at 3.2% on the first, and then when you add it in, it's at 4.2%. So we kind of stay in the 3 to 4%, but it's acknowledged. It's not a huge contribution on top, but yes, it's there.
Every bit counts.
When we come back with all the details, you'll be amazed. But at this point, as I say, we're providing preliminary assumptions and such. It adds to it, but you're going to see overall, it's not the non-tax revenues are a good contribution, but they're not necessarily all of your revenues. It's the taxation that'll make the biggest impact on your revenues. As we move down, we look at the operating expenditures. So this is very preliminary. We have the 2024 information, and we have then extrapolated from there. Once again, the green line is representing the natural inflation, assuming that most programs are going to increase over the next 10 years at 2 to 3%. That could be higher or lower. We're hopeful that things are moving back to more traditional inflation. We're starting to see that of late. And so over the next, 2 to 10 years, we're hopeful of better increases. Excuse me. We've added the population employment impacts, so they would add roughly in the range of about 1% at the end of the day. And that's represented in the purple line. The capital expenditures, and that's the bottom lines that we're talking about. At this point, we wanted to note that we're basing our analysis on the work that staff have put together with respect to the capital program. Capital program represents about $512 million right now. And we've undertaken two scenarios, because right now your capital levy for 2024 is estimated at 16 million. We've called that scenario 1. However, when finance has been working with the various departments and looking at the timing of their needs based on their judgment, partially some of that's coming out from the asset management work. There may be other factors that staff have taken into, but right now at a very high level, and this will be discussed further through the capital budget process, scenario 2 would suggest with the identified capital needs that instead of 16 million, maybe we need to consider $24 million as the additional revenue. That's in and around the level of spending that was talked about earlier, but obviously that's something through evaluating your asset management plan and then considering the details through the capital budget process, what the ultimate number is. If we take a look at the first forecast, you can see that the red line really is the average. If you take the 512 divided by 10, you're running just over $50 million a year. So that's the average spend in that red dotted line on the bottom. If you take a look at the proposed budget on a year-to-year basis, you can see that in the first 2 years, we're well in excess of that. And this is based on the $16 million, the lower scenario. This does not include water and wastewater. Once again, we're only talking about tax supported. So there are works that are front-ended, and towards the latter part of the forecast, there is some flexibility and maybe slowing down the forecast, but right now bringing it back up towards the end. So you can see we start in and around $79 million. We're at 77. We drop down to 50, 47, 40, and then back up on the latter end. With the funding, you can see, I won't go through a lot of details, but you can see the capital levy on the 2024 number is the 16 million. The reserve transfers are at 6.4. We have the OSIFA funding. We have gas tax. We have the tax-supported debt, so that's being factored in, additional debt. And then we have the DC funding, which is going towards the reserves. And lastly, grants funding is available. So I know staff have looked to try and minimize the amount of tax-supported debt. There may be, through the DC process that we'll be going with, there may be more debt that'll be required for the growth side of things. But this is, if we can offset that directly with the DC recoveries, then it would have nominal impact onto your rates. Now, if we look at the second forecast, you can see that things are a little, this is scenario 2, which presented the $24 million funding need. You can see that that brings us up to about $86 million and then $70 million. Once again, it's still the same amount of spend, but it's a little more front-ended as a result of staff's recommendations. And this is almost, if you go back to the asset management, I think there was a graph just showing, based on their assessment, needs, and they showed at the front end that it was significantly a higher number that needs to be addressed. So right now, all we've done is we've provided 2 preliminary analyses. The first one is trying to spread out the capital spending needs. The second is more reflective of the staff inputs that finance have provided. So that's still to be considered in conjunction with the asset management plan, in conjunction with the capital budget discussions, but we wanted to provide you with 2 different scenarios and just show you the impacts.
Can we go back to scenario number 1, please? I think Councillor Bell wanted to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarity, I'm not sure I understand, and maybe you can explain what is tax-supported debt and why it appears in certain years and not in other years.
So tax-supported debt means it has to be paid for from either your assessment or from your fees, fines, fares. So it's the revenue that's coming in on the tax side. It's not your water and wastewater debt. It's solely on the tax side. And those new debt charges are trying to address the fact that you have a higher spend. So you're going to have to, if we go with this program, you haven't got enough money immediately, so you're going to have to go out and get loans, debt, in order to finance it.
Okay.
And that means that the debt charges will be incorporated into later years in your operating budget. So if you issue $17 million now at current rates, depending on whether you do it over 10 years or 20 years, you probably, if you do it over 10 years, it'd probably be, your debt charges next year would be somewhere around $2.75 million in annual debt charges over the next 10 years. If you spread it over 20 years, you're probably sitting at about $1.5 million.
So can we be specific to particular activities that cause that?
Mm-hmm.
17 in 2024? Maybe it's a question for staff rather than yourself.
Yes, that would be part of your budget process. I mean, we may be able to answer it now. I think staff are here, but it will be, these are basically the preliminary capital budget numbers. If we go with this level of spend, this is how we have to finance it at the $16 million capital levy. And if we go with the higher needs, we'd have to increase the level of debt and increase the level of capital levy.
And this is driven, so if I may, Mr. Mayor, so this is driven by the fact our program is front-end loaded, and
Correct.
We don't have any, well, maybe we do. We appear not to have any flexibility to move to smooth that out.
This one is the smooth. The scenario 1 is the smoothed capital needs.
So even with the smooth capital needs, we need $17 million extra.
Correct.
In 2024.
Correct.
Okay. And can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
And that's in relation to the grants and donations. It's a huge number. Suddenly 14 million pops out in 1 year, and then the rest it's sort of an average of 1 or 2. What's behind that?
I haven't got the details with me, so
Heather Boyd could answer that, I think.
A good portion of that would be, we do have some money that we've received from provincial and federal grants for projects that we have scheduled in 2024. So as programs may or may not come up, new specific spending programs, we don't know what 2025 and beyond may or may not have for specific money we can spend.
So if I may, do we have the 14 million nailed down? Or is it possible that that will then move, if we don't have it, it'll move up to increase the capital levy or the tax supported debt?
Heather Bailey can answer. She sorted out how much was coming from what category.
Through the mayor to council. The majority of the federal and provincial grants that are showing in there is the assumptions on what the annual increases would be for the what was formerly known as the federal gas tax funding. I believe it's called Canada Community Canada Build Fund, something along those lines. Plus the OCIF formula funding grant. It's also based on an assumption for that one as well. That each year we would fully spend the amount that we receive on capital in the hopes that those grants continue. We are still waiting for confirmation on how long they intend to continue those two funding streams for capital. And then the other piece, there's a couple other projects that they have grants as part of the budget in the intent to apply for grants for the projects to help those projects actually happen.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor, so Heather, does that then include the 5 million that is assumed in the library budget?
Yes, so the 5 million for the library is part of that total as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. So just taking a look at the capital side of the operating budget so that you can see there's the pure operating, and then there's the part of your operating budget which is affected by the capital program. So you can see that there's the capital levy as we've spoken. There's the transfers to the capital reserves, so that helps to feed into the reserves as you're drawing them out over time, and then there's the actual debt charges. And you can see, Councillor, between 2024, the assumption from the debt, we see you go up to 5.2 million and then up to 7.3 million in 2025. So the funding's there, but it has an operating impact. And then there's the transfer to the operating reserves, just so that we fill out some of the rest of the operating budget. And you can see it's a bit choppy, but some of it's impacted as a direct result of the capital program. But then this is kind of the, I'll just qualify, we haven't smoothed anything yet. When we come back with the long-term financial plan, there's ability to, I hate to use the words play, but to work with the, the reserves and such. We haven't done that at this point. It's kind of like just raw data. But you can see the implications of the front end needs for the capital program will have a front end impact onto your tax needs. And if we go to scenario 2, you can see similar type of impact. Staff have tried to keep the debt in and around the same levels. That is to stay within the policies that have been set by council. Obviously, try to rationalize the asset management plan, the needs for water and wastewater, and then building all the infrastructure up front to accommodate growth. Those things will need financing, and they will impact the percentage of your operating expenditure of the debt as a comparison is your debt capacity ratio that the province monitors. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Councillor Miller, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question on that. Scenario 1, 16 million for 2024. Scenario 2, a big increase, 24 million. But I would think in scenario 2, if you start with a big jump in your capital levy, you wouldn't see the debt charges the same, but it's the same in the two scenarios. What am I missing there?
It's very similar in that you're trading with the higher expenditures, you're trading it with the higher capital levy. In the first 3 years, the level of spending isn't, well, actually first 4 years, level of spending is very similar. So the amount of funding that you need is very similar.
Just to follow up, so what you're saying is we get the big increase in 2024, but we're spending it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So debt charges, they're going to be pretty much the same. Okay, thank you.
And lastly, we take a look at the overall impacts. And if you look at the pure operating, trying to explain these graphs, the pure operating expenditures is the purple. So that's just the day-to-day operations to run, the maintenance of the roads, run the arenas, maintain the parks, etc. On top of that is your capital. And the capital always, and this once again doesn't include growth-related infrastructure. That will be layered on top. This is basically your regular capital programs. So the infrastructure has a direct impact on your day-to-day needs, and that's what we're trying to demonstrate. On the revenue side, that green line is the revenue that the fees, fines, fares that I talked about earlier, and then the arrow is showing you the difference, that amount that actually has to be picked up from property taxes. So that's the amount that will have to be recovered off of the assessment. And so that if we take a look at the tax rate, you can see that under scenario 1 that we have higher levels of taxes expected in the early part. That red line once again is reflecting the average annual increase of 2.9. So by the time you hit the end of the 10 years from today, it's averaging at a 2.9% impact. It's just that on the front end, you've got to get it up faster, and then you'll have a lower percentage increase annually on the latter part of the forecast. So you've got 10.7% increase expected. Now these are once again preliminary numbers subject to a more detailed review, and you can see the level of increase in the early part. The tax increases is more significant in the early part of the forecast. And then under scenario 2, you can see that it's a little choppier, higher at the front end, and then a little bit lower, so you can go with a lower rate, but it ends at pretty well the exact same spot. And this translates into a capital levy of 24 million and a 2024 tax increase of 22%. Once again, these are preliminary. We'll be back refining all of these. I know your consideration will be specifically on the 2024. The other item that we understand is under consideration is having a levy for the hospital reserves. The hospital, as I understand, is, or what's being projected here is to generate $46 million in reserves by 2033. And on average, if you set up a 1% net levy increase into the annual budget process, then you'd be looking at an additional 1%, obviously, on the numbers that we presented. So it'd be under scenario 1, an 11.7% increase in the first year, and by the time we hit the end of the forecast, it'd be 3.7. I'll give you this in a table format so you can see it a little bit better, but once again, I just wanted to, that green line is the scenario 1 tax rate. The dotted line represents adding the hospital levy on top. And if we take a look at the scenario 2, you have a very similar type of pattern. And looking at it in perhaps a little bit easier way to see it, the average tax rate under scenario 1 was 2.9% with the hospital levy. It'll be 3.7, and then scenario 2 was 4.2% with adding the hospital levy, it comes in just under 5. The big impacts are at the front end, and you can see in 2024 the scenario 1's at 10.7% or 11.7 with the hospital reserve contribution, or scenario 2 starts at 22%, and it's 23% with the levy.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very sobering table. It kind of says, I want to smooth this out. The average is going to be 4 point something. I'd love to see it 4 point something all over time, but reality says we've got to do some things at the front end. It clearly is going to be a challenge for us. We have 3 years left of this council term, and it looks like those 3 years are going to be filled with high tax increases. So those of us that want to be re-elected will no doubt have to reflect on that. But I think that should not hold us back. We have to recognize the realities of this. And I think you couldn't have put it any clearer than you have here. And I thank you for that.
Just bring in the observations, and it's probably been made obvious through our discussions, but obviously the capital program and the way that it impacts your operating expenditures, like the totality of your operating funding that has to be generated through the tax supported is significant. So that's a key driver. And we need to rationalize. We'll be back with you with a better, more refined picture once we get the asset management plan. We haven't had a chance to fully embrace it, but I understand that staff are conscious of a lot of it. But we'll have to take a look at it. And then as well, we'll need to consider the water and the wastewater, because the debt arising from that side needs to be added on top with the development charge to give you a full picture on the order of magnitude of potential debt you'll need to issue. So these are things that we'll refine over the coming months. Oops. Sorry. So some of the things that, from what we've presented, there's not a lot of magic to, your funding opportunities for these expenditures are somewhat narrowed. So we need to, the capital program, I think there's consideration to the spending needs and what you can do over the next 10 years with that program. With the debt, I've talked about debt could be a tool to help smooth staff for trying to stay within your policy, which is to stay at a 15% debt capacity. The province puts you at a maximum of 25%. It's almost like your house, where you go to the bank and the bank says that your mortgage payments can't exceed 25% of your household income. It's the same thing. The province probably adopted it from the banks. You can't have your debt charges exceeding more than 25% of your total owned revenues. So right now you have very strong financial policies that say we want to keep it at 15. That's something that needs to be considered, and especially when we layer on top of it growth-related debt. And we may come back with recommendations that say, you may want to start working with the developers to have them prepay some of their charges, so you've got the money up front, or do front ending, or and you're not the only municipality. Municipalities such as Peel Region are considering different ways of financing the growth-related infrastructure, because layering this on top of trying to accommodate growth, trying to meet the provincial targets on housing, it's a challenge. So these are things that we will come back, we will assess and be back and have a broader dialogue with you on opportunities. You know, there's also, staff had said, well, there's opportunities maybe for internal financing rather than going out externally. You know, there's a certain amount of money that you're making on the reserves. Normally, your investment rate is lower than your debt borrowing. You know, you go to the bank, they give you a certain percentage, but if you're going to get a mortgage, it's much higher. So you may be able to do some internal financing, and at least that fund, you're going to make a commitment to pay it back, but at least you're getting maybe a 2% savings on the interest. So that's something that we'll consider on a go-ahead basis as well.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
Do you have any sense of what the impact would be of the future DC and water and wastewater projects in terms of percentage on our debt financing? Are we talking 1%, or maybe it's 5% that really pushes us to the limit?
Unfortunately, we're too early in the process to answer that. I think we can be back with some preliminary. I think we're supposed to be back during Q2 with the DC study. We may be able to come back a little bit earlier with some preliminary analysis, but we're not to that point as of today to give you that. But we can, through looking at the building, the amount of building that'll occur, and when we need to do the expenditures, we can give you a cash flow and give you an estimate of how much debt you may need to cash flow. Or alternatively, seek discussions with the development community.
Could I ask one more question, Mr. Mayor?
Absolutely.
You showed in the capital forecast we're kind of front-end loaded. Is that just because we can't yet imagine what we're going to spend down the road? And in your experience, is it typical that people tend to underestimate what they're going to spend down the road just because they don't have the imagination, they don't know what's going to happen? Could we be putting in a contingency that says we might be spending some more money in the years 5 through 10 that we're not actually showing on here?
I think making the contributions to the reserve as your contingency is always productive. You know, your asset management plan, I think, is giving you far more information than what municipalities used to collect. I've been in the game for 45 years, so I've seen the changes over time. The province first started talking about asset management in 2000. I was doing some of their, on their behalf, a lot of the lectures on asset management before they even came into putting it into place. Walkerton made mandatory recommendations. That was 2002. The province put this legislation in 2015. It is, to me, being in the capital for so long, it is a very important document. I think you need to monitor it, because I think part of the problem with water and wastewater is it lasts so long, and a lot of your infrastructure was built during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Everybody thinks, oh, there's not a problem. Well, now, if you build it in the 60s, those assets are 60 years old. If they only last 100 years, you got the next 40. Depending on the material type, they won't last 100 years. So we're now into an era of understanding that we need to plan a little bit better to manage our assets. And unfortunately, that's what you've got to deal with over the next, really the next 30 years are critical for a lot of your significant assets. You know, you can let the parks maybe get a little weedier and stuff like that, but you can't let water mains fail.
So your practical advice would be then to put some more money away for that rainy day?
I did probably one of the first asset management for water and wastewater, and it was Aurora, and I did it in the late 90s. And yeah, or maybe it was the early 90s. And exactly how we do asset management planning today. And you measure it, and you start to put in contributions into the reserve and such. And 5 years later, they had a significant failure. How they did the install, however the materials and stuff like that, they had a significant fail in a whole neighborhood. And they had to go in and tear up millions of dollars of infrastructure. The council of the day weren't that concerned because they said, how much is it? Oh, we got more money in the reserve for that purpose. Okay, fix it and then bring Mr. Scanlon back in to redo the evaluation and see what the impact is and what we need to do. It's a very strong financial tool, and it's probably not much different than what you do at home. Your car is going to, only going to last. You're going to replace it. You start to plan and such. So it's I would submit probably a newer reality for a lot of municipalities to get into a very detailed long-term financial plan. And I think that's why staff want to continue to do these long-term financial plans in order to advise you over the next 10 years, what are we seeing and how do we deal with it, rather than going with this knee-jerk 10% increases in 1 year. How do we smooth it out over time? That, for the most part, just concludes my presentation. As I noted, we're waiting for a couple of other. From here, obviously, you'll be going through a process with staff, the regular capital and operating process, but you've got a lot of background, I think, which will assist you in considering that. But we will be back to give you the longer term impacts. We'll talk about debt capacity. We'll talk about rate increases, et cetera. And that'll be what the scope of our work is to come back and give you a longer term perspective on things. And we will be doing that probably at the end of Q2.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Miller, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, through to Gary. So Councillor Bell started on. I just want to ask, again, the risk management part of the plan. Putting a little aside, a little more in reserves. Do you see any other risk management tactics we could use other than making sure we have good data, we're up to date on that?
Well, I think, and this is something that'll have to go through staff. And, Rob, I've known for a long time. He's very on top of asset management and such. But I think he did note that some of the works didn't have condition assessments. So some of the things, the water mains are probably the ones that are the most difficult to test. Sewers, you can at least put the cameras through them and stuff like that. So, I mean, you'll have to look to the advice of staff on do we feel confident enough in the data? Because, and keep in mind, certain materials just have a natural shorter lifespan. Things like cast iron rust, so you get brown water, but at least you're getting the iron in your system every day. But people don't like that. If you go to a ductile iron, it doesn't rust, but it snaps. Hamilton Mountain, they built in the 60s and 70s. They built it all with ductile iron. Well, the mountain shifts, so all of these pipes were breaking. So during the 2010, they're out there spending millions of dollars to replace all of these pipes. That's the type of thing that you need to look at is to some extent condition assessment. So there's the financial side, which is giving you that, like Aurora, giving you that background if stuff happens, but it's looking to do the that level of comfort. How detailed were you in the evaluation? And I haven't read the asset management plan. I'm not sure what they've done, but that would be the second part of it is test where you think you need to test.
Second question, Mr. Mayor, to Gary. when you come back, and I know this is preliminary, but what I'm looking for from you is we have certain requirements we have to meet. We have growth forecasts. We got to plan for it and all that stuff. So there's three ways we do this. We do it through debt, which you said you'll address, increasing taxes or service cuts. So do you see those as options that you're going to be delving into when you come back?
Yeah, the first two, yes. The
service cuts are up to us.
The third one's a little difficult for me to step into your shoes because really, that's your evaluation. I mean, you define the service levels and what's going to be presented or provided to your constituents, and that's the discussion with staff. So, but you're right. If you need to cut or change programming in some way, that's something that you need to have a discussion with your staff and with the public to see, where's the happy spot in trying to balance these different matters. I mean, is tax increases palatable, or is service reduction palatable? Those you need more dialogue on that.
Or reducing our capital, as we talked about with bridges. So, but I'll disagree with you. I don't think there's any happy spot in this, but I thank you for your answer.
Mr. Walton has his hand up, and then Councillor Pierce.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council. I'll add into what Gary said there. And council will remember that in 2023, you approved staff to go out and look at the formation of a potential stormwater utility. And that's part of the whole idea of in stormwater, getting the whole asset maintained in a different way, where you are looking more at the condition of it, doing a budget for it like water and wastewater, and actually collecting fees for it like water and wastewater, and taking it off of taxation directly to the people that are using it. And I think that's something that many municipalities do. And I remind you, so there are things like that we are looking at for changing it in different revenues. And just so everybody knows, this is not a problem strictly for Brant County. Stormwater has been sort of neglected in a lot of municipalities. We've got all these stormwater management ponds, which are now 20, 30 years old. We're going to need to start cleaning them out. We've got infrastructure that needs to be fixed there. A lot of it's not in terrible shape, but we do need to get the condition of it done. So I think that that's a good example of positive go forward in maintaining an asset and looking at different revenues. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Walton. Councillor Pierce, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment, if I could. Through you to Gary, I just want to say thank you. It was a very good presentation. It really, as much as we kind of, we think around this table of what it could be, what it can be, when you see it in front of you, and I know these are just preliminary, and there's, how did you call it, some smoothing maybe. The key for me is when you look at page 49, the summary of the tax rate increases. That to me, that spells it out that, and as Mr. Walton said there, and as everybody knows, we've discussed it, we're not the only municipality that's in this situation that over the next several years, there's going to be unprecedented tax hikes. And I think the way that you've laid out this presentation and you described as to why, and that's the big question that people will ask is the whys. It's obviously, as Councillor Miller said, there's no happy to it, but it may help some people understand the reality of the why. And I appreciate that, you doing that through this presentation. I look forward to the next one. So thank you.
Any other questions? Although there's no action required, I'm going to entertain a motion to receive the report, please. Councillor Bell, Councillor Kyle, all those in favor? Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Pleasure. And Merry Christmas.
Takes us to 2.22 on the agenda, and that is going to be Heather Boyd. She's going to let us know whether it's going to be a Merry Christmas. And this year, next year, and the next 2 years.
Thank you through the mayor. And yes, 2023 will be a very Merry Christmas. With council's indulgence, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Watsons, to Gary and Byron and Navreet, who have put in a lot of time and a lot of phone calls with us. They've been a pleasure to work with, and we also want to say congratulations to Gary on his pending retirement. I'm not sure if this is his last meeting with us or with anyone, but he's been fantastic. They've both been wonderful to work with, so thank you so much. Also want to extend a thank you to all the county staff. We've been contacting and harassing borderline many departments over the past few years, trying to pull together past few months development charges, this plan, asset management. Everybody has worked really hard and has taken a lot of calls and a lot of bugging from us to pull these numbers together. Especially to our treasury group, to Heather Mifflin, Heather Bailey, and their group. For putting together endless numbers of number calculations and crunching and working really hard to put a good context to this. I know they're difficult numbers and we will get into that, but they've worked incredibly hard to pull this together, as well as all the other financial projects we're doing at the moment. So thank you for that indulgence. So when we went into this project, we weren't entirely sure where the long-term financial plan would take us. We weren't even sure what exactly product we'd be presenting at the end of the day. I think we went into it full well knowing that there's a lot of unknown and moving target pieces involved in this. There's a lot of studies that are still kind of midway or just completing. Our strategic plans kind of been deferred going into this to set council's priorities for the next 4 years. Presented today was just the first nugget of information on where the tax projections could look over the next 10 years. What this report, my report, specifically deals with a few components, items that council specifically is asked to look at in the context of the long-term financial plan. So we will delve into that further as we go. Next steps on our part, Watsons has outlined their next steps for the long-term plan. We would like to move forward with some specific council engagement, some specific public engagement, try to get a sense of where council's priorities are, which of those kind of directions that Gary talked about we could look at, they're interested in pursuing, and moving forward to get some one-on-one kind of dialogue onto these numbers. So we've been working with the communications department. We have a public engagement strategy rolling out in January. So we'll present the results of that back when we come back in February on the next phase of this project. The purpose of this report, it doesn't tell council how to spend the money. And I think this gets into the service cut discussion. It's meant as a tool that will help inform future council decisions on, do we move forward with this? Well, what is the impact? How does that look out on a longer term basis? We get a lot of things presented to this table with ideas, and usually there's a budget number that comes with them. And some of them are within our normal operating levels and they're, it's all okay. But some of them are significant asks. And I really think that one of the things we need to consider doing on a go forward basis is taking a closer financial analysis before we vote yes or no on some of these big projects. So that being said, that's the extent of my main report. I'll quickly go through some of the sections, and then I imagine if anyone wants to stop at any time to talk about them. In terms of the growth projections, we did have some discussion today about, are they realistic? One of the things we are excited to be working with is Policy Planning is working with us and with Watsons on coming up with a model that we can track where the projections really are. So based on current data, building permits as they come in, those kind of things, keeping a better tracker so that when we do updates to these things, we're not basing it on 10, 15-year-old information. We're basing it on where have we been over the last 3 or 4 years, what servicing, do we have servicing to keep going forward? I think that's one of the things, like, are we at capacity limits? Where do we see, planning is going to slow down? Where do we see it's going to speed up? So that's one piece. We want to improve those growth projections, and I think we are excited to be moving forward in a manner that'll help with that. I won't speak too much of the property assessment piece. I think Gary did a good job explaining that, and we'll look at that closer. But being based on 2016 values makes it very difficult, one, to explain to taxpayers, and two, to see how a house that we're saying the average is 400,000 even exists in our current environment, right? But it also needs to be noted that when MPAC does do that assessment update, it doesn't mean everybody's taxes are going to double, because my house was 400,000, now it's 800,000. It doesn't mean your taxes double. The tax rates will shift accordingly, and things will balance out. It will have some impacts because there's always shifts in categories and assessments, but overall, it doesn't mean, just everybody's going to be paying a whole lot more just because of that. In terms of the contribution to the new hospital project, so one of the questions I got asked today was about the furniture equipment costs, and the math didn't seem to work. Those are the numbers we were provided on September 5th. The one piece, the furniture equipment cost estimates, is based on construction, but not the ancillary costs. So I think that might be where some of the confusion was. It's only part of those construction and ancillary costs. The long and short story is we do not know what they will finally be asking us to contribute towards this project. There's a lot of pieces in terms of how much is the whole project going to cost, depending on when it starts, what kind of inflation are we looking at between now and then, what contributions are we going to get from the public, what contributions are we going to get anything from the feds. I don't know that I'd be banking on the province changing their funding model, but these are all things that may contribute in. So at the end of the day, my message is we need to get started. And in a significant and meaningful way. And that's why I put forward the proposal that we have in front of us, which is 1% every year. So the 1% we would put in 2024, which I think is going to be essential to get started. Next year, that would be built right into the operating budget, and then another 1%. And that's how we get to around 125 million by the 15-year window. There will be also some interest, there'll be interest accrued on that, a lot more once you get further into it, but there's so many moving pieces, but I think that's the only way that I see that we can make a real good, this is how we're going to move forward. I'd also like to frame, though, just for semantics, is that at this time it's going to be a contribution to our hospital reserve. We don't want to say we're making a commitment to a certain amount of funding at this point, because as soon as we do that, it's going to have impacts on our debt limits. So just when we're going around, this is our proposal to put a contribution into the reserve funds. There may be opportunities that if this hospital project doesn't move forward expeditiously, maybe having those reserve funds, we can use them also as internal loans and those kind of things. There's opportunities building up this fund that are going to be good for us beyond just having money when that hospital bill comes through. I will be preparing a decision package for our budget meeting because this can't wait till we get the long-term financial plan done. So council's going to need to make some kind of decision on, do we go with this plan? Do we go with part of this plan, or do we not do it in 2024? And just finally on that, two other components of that will be communications campaign. I mean, if this hospital is a 10 to 15 year build out, we're going to have to keep the public engaged and interested and knowing that, their contributions are going towards something. And advocacy at the provincial and federal level to look at the funding model. I think increasingly it's becoming apparent that this is a huge ask for local contributions. And, talking to some of the people involved in the hospital project, they recognize that this is not easy. This is almost undoable when you get down to the later years of this. So they recognize that. They want to advocate for change as well. So I would recommend that any opportunity council has to put that bug in the provincial ear that is worthwhile. For the main library branch.
Heather?
Yep, sorry.
We have a question from Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mayor Bailey, to Heather. seeing as this is over a 15-year period and the timeline we've been given is 10 years, or MPP Balmo was here the other day saying 5 to 7, which I don't know how that happens unless he's going to also come with a couple $100 million in his pocket. Is 1% even enough? Like, should we be looking at 2% to get, because this is within 15 years, or is part of it that we'd have to go to debentures if, at year 10 and then pay this off, or, yeah.
Partly recognizing that we've seen what the budget, what we're going to be presenting as a preliminary budget. I think 1% is a good start. I think if we get into I don't think the hospital has any firm, there's no guarantee when that hospital project's going to start or how long it's going to take. So they're not going to need our full money the first day they go into the ground. So I do think if we get part way, and that does happen, say 7 years, they're moving forward and we need to put some more money through, absolutely, that's a discussion when we're going to have to talk seriously about our ARL, our debt limit, right? That's going to be a project we're not going to be able to do just on our own. And there may be additional opportunities to, maybe the province will loan us money. Maybe there'll be other opportunities in that window to try to get money for this project. I think 1% is a decent place to start. And I think we can always accelerate it. We can always jump to 2%, maybe in some of those lower years where the tax levy increase isn't projected to be so high, right? If you're 5 to 7, things look better. Maybe that's your, let's just get this done. But
thank you.
Councillor Howe is your next.
Thank you, through the mayor to Heather. Thanks for everybody's work on this and your work on this. Specific to that chart related to the hospital, process-wise, we're not committing, if we were to at some point adopt that chart, it's a guideline, correct? Like we're not committing council of 15 years from now and the residents of 15 years from now of having a 10% hospital surcharge on their taxes.
No, and I don't intend it to be a surcharge. It's going to be a contribution to reserves that's going to play out in the annual budgets. But absolutely, I would actually probably suggest that we not specifically adopt this chart, but that we start putting the money forward, and every year it'd be a budget decision package for a 1% increase.
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just while we're on the hospital there, yeah. So just to confirm, the message is that we're building a hospital reserve fund here. We're not committing to X number of dollars or whatever like that. And I love that idea. I think that is the way to go for sure. And I just want to touch on something that you talked about, the communication strategy that's going out on starting January, I think you said, and stuff like that, to council and to the public. I think that it's a must. And I appreciate the fact that the wheels are already turning on that. And I think I'm assuming that it's not just specific on a hospital fund. It's kind of an overall communication of kind of what we heard this morning. This is what's coming to the county over the next so many years or whatever, just to kind of again to get that information out to the public. So there again, still some of them are going to say, well, I didn't know, you didn't, that type of thing. But whatever we can do communication wise, I know our communication department does an amazing job, and if it's even possible, they are getting better, so that's great. But yeah, anything we can do on that to take advantage of full communication, I support that 1,000,000%. So thank you, and again to all the staff, like you started off with the number of different people that have been involved with gleaning data for this. So yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Pierce. So in January specifically, we're starting our public engagement on both the long-term financial plan and our 2024 budget. So those two will be going out early January for consultation. We will be meeting with hospital representatives sometime early in the new year to start talking about communication and messaging specific to the hospital project.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So now on to the County of Brant Main Library branch. So council asked us ask that this project be reviewed in the context of the long-term financial plan. What I presented in my report is intended to be some very objective review of the finances for this project, speaking to the funding sources and the long-term impacts of the new branch library. It's not intended in any way as a staff commentary on this project and the viability and the value. And it doesn't specifically address the issue of the contract, which is why the whole matter's been paused at the moment. So this is strictly a numbers review of how we would fund this project going forward. And it's up to council, what they do with this information. So just wanted to qualify with that. I think the information contained in there is, to me, it's self-explanatory, but I've read it 1,000 times. So if council has any questions or comments, I'm more than happy to address those.
Councillor Howes, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. And I presume that there will be at a later time, not even necessarily today, there will be a further discussion on this topic. But I wanted to clarify, I want to make sure I understand this a little bit. You say you've read it 1,000 times. I've read it a few times, but I want to make sure I'm getting it. Am I right in understanding that the cost to the taxpayer of the new library project is now $11.661 million, and that, to use regular people language, that would be amortized in the equivalent of a mortgage over 25 years? And I've got two more parts, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. So amortized over 25 years, which has a cost, I think, maybe $700,000 per year in terms of mortgage payments. And that this adds 1/3 of 1% to our debt level that is within our self-imposed debt level limit of 15%. And then, so I want to make sure I have that accurately, those pieces. And then my question for you is, the current library that we have is 100 and something years old. I think it functioned for the community for about 75 years before it was renovated and added to. And so my point is that some of these assets deliver functionality to our communities for many, many, many years. Do we have any options beyond the 25-year amortization period for an asset that's going to serve us for 50 years plus? Thanks.
So Councillor Howes is correct that at this point, the total amount that is intended to be funded from the tax levy is $11,661,000, plus or minus the $4,000 from the contribution from reserves, which was funded by previous tax years. In terms of amortization, typically we are over a 25-year period. I checked this morning with our finance group. There is an option for a 30-year amortization through IO, but that's the limit. The amortization would decrease the annual, but it would increase the total project cost. And I don't know, I don't have the number still in front of me, but there's a significant increase to the total cost for extending the borrowing over another 5 years. 50 years isn't an option. 30 years is about our maximum that we can go. And I'm not sure if there's any other pieces I haven't answered in your question.
Councillor Howes?
Mr. Through the mayor, and just the 1/3 of 1% on our debt limit.
Yeah, and that sounds, I don't know,
within the
math
15%.
in front of me, but it's from 13.46%, which we're at without this project, to 13.79, which we would be at with this project.
Any other questions? Councillor Bell, you're next.
Yeah, I guess about through you to Heather. I see that we've been able to, or appear to be able to move more money to funding by development charges. Could you just give a bit of background to that, and I've got a follow-up?
Yep. So we are undertaking a background charges study that's going to go forward to be implemented before September 1st. So every time we do that, we kind of do a refresh. We look at all the projects, their current costs. When we did our last background study on this project, the cost was expected to be considerably less. So there was less money in our current development charges study, which we're collecting for now, which is what we calculated based on the previous reports that we put forward. So we asked Watson to take a close look at this project specifically and come up with what they thought we would be eligible for through development charges, and the new numbers reflect that. Noting though that a good number of these development charges won't be collected even within the limit of the current study, but will be post-project. So they'll be paid for, development charges pieces will be paid back over a longer period of time.
So a related question, if I may, Mr. Am I correct in understanding that the majority of the funding from the tax levy actually is to pay for the renovation of the old town hall rather than paying for the library?
Well, in development charges, and we'll get into this more when we present the study, and Gary might even be able, but it's calculated based on use. It's not necessarily calculated based on this is the old hall, this is the new hall, but it's the percentage of the total building that will be used for library space. But from that, you also have to take out the benefit to existing. So we currently have a library which we're replacing. So a good portion of the part we're paying for is the cost of replacing that library, like a asset management, kind of like taking that library, putting it in the new location. That part's the benefit to existing. And the remaining part, which is attributed to growth in the community, is what gets covered by development charges. Now, also noting that those development charges are also based on the idea that study gets approved in its format as we go forward. We still have a public engagement process for that. If council decides not to implement the full charges, there's a lot of opportunity still where that might not hold true, but based on the study as it goes forward, the preliminary study, these are the numbers we believe will be entitled to be recuperated from development charges.
Yeah. And final question: if we did not go ahead with this, then am I correct in understanding that we would be able to use, I think the number was $889,000 a year for the next 25 years for other purposes?
Yeah, not starting in 2024, but going forward after the project completion, there'll be that much less out of the operating future requirements.
So we create $25 million we could spend on something else.
Yeah, or not charge in taxes.
Or not spend it all. Yeah. Thank you, Heather.
Councillor McAlpine, you're next, and then Councillor House.
So I'm just curious. Okay, so the development charges, they're going to the library, okay, for this particular project. Does that take away the potential for using development charges for development of a library in, say, St. George, with the development going there in the future?
So all the library projects all get fed into the development charges background study, and as long as they're eligible, they do go forward as additional pieces that we're collecting for. The libraries overall have a limit to how much they can collect based on current service levels, and it's a complicated mathematical equation, but based on their current service levels, maintaining that, although we have more people, we're not providing an enhanced level of service. So that's how the limits get calculated. So it's difficult at this point to say definitively if there would be any impact. I mean, they could all be collected for, but the total amount we can collect for in any given year is going to have a limit. So it may just push some projects back, or it may just mean we're paying for them for a lot longer, the projects that go forward. Post period, yes, after the current study. So it'll push more things into the post period that we'll be paying for in that after that 5-year window.
So it's eating up the development charges for the next 5 years. Is that what
no? This project, all these projects would start and I haven't done a great analysis on the other projects, but all these projects, every time we collect development charges, a little bit gets collected for them all. But because the library can only collect, say, so much money from development charges each year, it'll extend how long. So the library is going to be, the new library is going to be a project that's going to be well into the post period as well. All the projects get extended further into the post period. So we're paying developers, we're collecting developers are paying, and we're collecting development charges for these projects for well beyond the 5-year window that our study is.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Heather, and this is actually a follow-up question to Councillor Bell's question. Just to clarify, in Councillor Bell's premise of by not doing this project, we saved $800 and something thousand per year for 25 years. That assumes that during that time frame, we build no new branch library.
Correct. And that number also doesn't take into account any additional operating or maintenance or any of those costs that would either come with the new library or without the new library, which would be two different models, but I can't say which one would be higher.
Correct. And follow up, Mr. Mayor, recognizing, you know, we've talked earlier tonight or today about the growth projections for our community. And I'm just wanting to exercise caution towards anyone having the idea of keeping the current library as the main branch library while the population doubles. I think that's we have to be cautious about thinking that way. Thank you.
Councillor Bell, you're next.
Yeah, just to follow on from Councillor House, and you know I do like the idea of the library, so let's start from there. But there are other ways of skinning the cat, and I understand that it's possible that a local developer would be interested in building us a library at no cost other than the leasing cost for that space. And that would save us a huge amount of money. And so going back to the earlier conversation about the front end loading on capital, one way of overcoming that would be to consider that course of action. Rather than build our own, have somebody else build it, we lease it. And we get the space. I'm not doubting the need for space here, but we could get that 24,000 square feet, not through asking the taxpayer to pay $11 million, but another route. And I think that should be on our table, given our understanding now of our overall financial position.
Any other questions? Councillor Miller?
Just point of order on this. You're the mayor, you're running the meeting, but were we discussing the library itself?
Yes.
I mean, as far as it seems like we seem to be going into an argument that we're going to have next month, not today.
Right. Good. Councillor Bell?
Yeah, so just to answer Councillor Miller's question, I'm thinking about the financing of this and the relation to the overall impact on tax rates that we saw from the Watson presentation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Miller. I do believe there are going to be other options brought forward in the near future about other ways to do a library. And I don't know, I've never met with any builders or anything, but I understand there's a plan. Maybe some renderings coming forward for other options, but I don't know any of the details. I only know what's being whispered in the wind. And so I have never met with anyone else, but maybe we can, are there any other questions, Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't know if we're near wrap up or whatever, but I just want to say I want to thank everybody. I know Councillor Pierce has already mentioned it, but we have heard a lot of good information this morning. And probably a lot of stuff that we knew it was coming, whatnot, but I'm really concerned how much we can put on the taxpayer. That hasn't been mentioned. We just throw the figures out. But the 10, 11% or whatever. I think it's time, hopefully over this time of the Christmas season and whatnot, and before we get back into this in January, we think what the residents can assume. I think that's is going to be an important thing. I think the residents will be receptive to the proposal toward the hospital reserve, but some of the other stuff, we got to really stop and think about this. And there's been mentioned earlier and I'll bring it up about Cleaver Bridge. You can't, and there's other projects that, there's a road down in Councilor Garneau's and I's area, 2 roads. One is closed. It's been closed for 3 years. We haven't done an awful lot about it. Staff is working on it. So I don't like seeing Cleaver Road getting pushed ahead. And we got 2 houses going to fall in the river on Front Street in Onondaga if we don't do something, get off our A's and do something. So I just concerned where all this is going to go. I'm not trying to be the Grinch at this time of the year, but we need to think. And I don't know how much the taxpayers can really afford. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know whether Heather was going to go on to talk about the next item, but if you're not, could I raise it?
Let Heather raise it.
Yeah, please.
Okay, if we're done on that item, so jumping into the affordable housing and our commitment to the housing master plan and task force objectives. So for this one, I know that the city we did get an update at social services on what they expect the plan is going to cost over the next 10 years or so. And I know that we spoke about that a little bit at council the other night. I do think that there's a lot more work to be done on this before we come to any firm, we're putting more money in, we're not putting more money in discussion. Because I think we need to talk to the city about how things like the cooperative project might count towards this. And I think we need to be careful that it does count towards this and how it counts towards this before we spend more money on those kind of things. And I know they're looking at some pieces too in terms of working with nonprofit groups. I don't think we need to, at this point, panic or throw another $20 million into our budget. I think we need to work with the city on how can we keep these costs to some relative level. We do have in our agreement the 15.125 million is referenced as amount that we are going to commit to doing on projects, and we're working towards that. But I don't think at this point we need to go too far afield till we nail this down a little bit closer.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. You're very right, Heather. Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're very right. I mean, it's preliminary, but the direction is clear. I mean, if we are to meet the target set by Mayor Bailey and Mayor Davis, we have another 300 units to build, and the average cost of building those units has gone up humongously. And the amount of money we're getting in terms of grants appears to be going down. And there is a whole chunk that is meant to be provided by not-for-profit organisations, and so far, of the 343 units they should build in this 10-year period, they've built 1. So the city has come forward with a suggestion that maybe we can subsidise what they're doing, and that is an extra cost that's not actually mentioned here. It's another $5 million that would come to the county if we followed that direction. But in total, there's $30-odd million there potentially, which, to be clear, is not at all reflected in the long-term financial plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. We just received this recently. It's not reflected, and at this point, we haven't had nothing. We've had nothing requested for a 2024 budget that we specifically need to move forward on. So at this point, it's a question mark in our books.
Yeah. So I understand that, but as we're looking at a long-term financial plan, it is potential liability that we can see. Maybe it's not next year, but there are still 5 or 6 years of your plan left, Mary, I think. So over that period, we might be looking at an extra $3 or $4 million a year that we need to contribute, which is quite significant in terms of the impact on the tax rate to the taxpayer, because that's where it's going to come
I think
from.
the feasibility of that objective too will have to be reviewed, because I do, three of the future projects are intended to be in the county of Brant, and I don't know that we even have sites even contemplated yet for those. So there's a lot of pieces. I imagine that sometime between now and then we'll have to sit down with the city and talk about realistic objectives for the 2031 deadline.
Just as an aside here, and those of my colleagues that were in the Social Services Committee, we had to push back on the city because the city wanted us to approve that financing plan, and we said no, it had to come back to this council. So I think we need to be aware that sooner rather than later we're going to be pressed to approve or otherwise. But I think to put it in the long-term financial plan, and it's one of those comments I made to Gary, that are there things that we are not really thinking about that will eat up some of the space that appear to be forming 4 or 5 years down the track when the tax rate actually goes back down to even zero or even negative. Well, this is the kind of thing that I think we should be planning for, reserving for, and we should not ignore it, because I think we will do so both at our reputational peril, but also at the failure to deliver on what is a really important program to the community.
I absolutely agree, and I think the one thing that isn't captured in long-term financial plan that never really could be is new initiatives, right? Because every year things come forward that, great ideas or things that we absolutely have to contribute, or emergency failures or something that we have to fund, right? So those things aren't captured in the plan, and I think seeing what those might be 5 or 6 years is why in almost always the asset management plans that they always show a bit of a dip in that 5 to 7 year window, because you don't know what's coming, and likely things will fill that gap, and if not, then it'd be a great time to contribute to reserves so that we don't see the giant jump at the end. But that's why these things are really important, that they keep updated every year, and that we go through it, and that we consider it at the beginning of every budget year. Where are we at now? Are we close to our targets? Do we need to adjust things? And that's the key to this. Otherwise, it's not much of a one point in time look at where we're at isn't valuable compared to a tool that we can use. Oh, we have this giant decision to make. Well, let's see how this layers on, and what can we adjust, and what can we move back out of that window.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. And yes, Councillor Bell touched on part of what I wanted to say, and my neighbor here and I are on the same side of this one. At the last, so like a couple minutes ago, I think in response to Councillor Bell, you were saying we haven't seen specific dollar asks from the city. I think you said that, but this is what I want to clarify. At the last social services meeting, we were a little concerned that we were being asked to commit the county to some specific dollar figures, and we were reassured in the meeting that by supporting and voting for the item that was on the agenda, we weren't binding the county. But as we move forward, we're going to need some strong and timely input from staff as we sit in those meetings. So I just wanted to kind of pass that along.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Chambers.
It gives me a chance to apologize for being late. I was at another meeting, and I'm not just exactly sure where we are in the agenda for one thing. So I apologize if I'm speaking out of sync. But I did want to make a couple comments on some of the things that have just been said, particularly with regard to housing. It's my understanding that the city is the service manager for housing, and we don't look at it as county housing or city housing. We look at it as city-county housing. In other words, we're all together. It's also my understanding that budgeting, the service manager has the say on the budget. We have input, but we don't have the final yes or no. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I want to say is, over the years, two things have changed from my perspective with regard to healthcare and housing. And Councillor Coleman and the people that have been around a little bit will recognize that healthcare and housing were not on the radar years ago in terms of being funded by property tax. It's just in the recent years that housing and healthcare, which are a concern to the people, are being essentially downloaded by ourselves onto the property tax. And that's not a good thing, because healthcare and housing are expensive, and property taxes are not the right way to fund that. And we have to be careful about that. What that leads to is tax rates within the system. Years ago, education was looked at as being very unfair to be assessed onto farmland, for example, because farmland doesn't need education. Farmland doesn't need healthcare. Farmland doesn't need housing. So perhaps we should be looking at our tax rate system, whereby the residential component that uses healthcare and uses housing should be paying more than a 10-acre agricultural field. Those are some of the things that we need to look at going forward, because as time goes on, if we keep downloading stuff onto the property taxes, then the property tax system has to be looked at, just like it was looked at years ago when education became an issue and the rural communities rebelled on paying high education taxes. And that's why we have the system whereby the farms are divided into an acre with buildings and the farmland. So stay tuned. If we're going to keep putting healthcare in the form of millions of dollars and housing in the form of millions of dollars on the property taxes, your property tax system becomes very, very unfair. And forgive me for, because I don't even know where you are in the agenda, but I did want to make one comment with regard to what Heather just said, and that's we need tools to see where we are and where we're going. Every year I ask the auditor what the financial position of the county is. In the last few years, he's said that it's been very, very good. 10 years from now, long-term financial planning, I would like to anticipate that the auditor will say our financial position is good. So between now and then, we need to monitor, we need to have a way to monitor on our financial position so that in 10 years we're not taken by surprise that it's good. We should know it's good because we've been monitoring it all the way. And to monitor it, we need tools. And I would like, and I've asked this before, I would like our financial staff to provide us with tools to monitor our financial position as the years go by. And again, I apologize, but I want to get this out. I just came from I'm a director on an insurance company, and insurance companies and banks are the most highly regulated in terms of having to be financial sound and have stability in their finances. Because if they're not, if a bank goes broke, everybody goes broke. If an insurance company can't pay the claims, then that's not good. Insurance companies have what they call early warning tests. Banks have what they call early warning tests, which are essentially ratios. I'll give a couple examples that enable the directors of the banks, insurance companies, to see very, very easily how we're progressing. For example, one of the early warning tests of an insurance company is claims ratio. Claims ratio is the amount you pay in claims as a percentage of what you take in premium. So if your claims are being are more than what your premiums are, then you're not in good shape. So the early warning test is you should be in a range between 35% and 40% of the ratio. And if we know what that ratio is, if it's getting bad, then we have to do something. So those are the kind of early warning tests that I think we need as a municipality to be able to very, very easily measure the financial position of the municipality as we go forward. So perhaps Heather and whoever may want to comment on some of the early warning tests that we need to ensure that we are moving in the right direction. I mentioned before one time that as a rule of thumb, your industrial assessment should be of a certain percentage of your whole as opposed to residential. The rule of thumb used to be 20% is good, residential 80%. We've had it where we've had residential 92% and industrial 8%. That's a bad sign. And if you keep doing that, you're going to go broke. So you do things to slow residential, increase industrial, so you can have that correct ratio. But you need to know that ratio. You need to know that you're out of whack before you can fix it. That's all I want to say. I apologize for my little rant, and I feel like a guy that just came in and took over the show, but I didn't want to do that.
You sort of did, but it's okay. Heather, do you want to?
Yep, through the mayor to comment on that. So one of the clear indicators that we have in place is our self-imposed debt repayment limits. So that 50% that we set, it gives us a good cushion between that and the 25% hard provincial limit, which to go beyond, we'd have to get approval from the OLT at this point. So that's one of them. I would recognize that part of this, and this leads into my last little bit, part of this plan, and I've said before, it's about the maintaining this plan and keeping it up. Our staff fully recognize that there's a lot of financial tools, there's a lot of reports to council, there's a lot of things we could be doing more of and better of, and I believe it's time for us to start presenting that in a more sophisticated manner than we have before. The resources we have are keeping the doors open, they're paying the bills, but at this point, and what will be coming forward in the budget is an ask for some financial resources, because these people, we don't have the time or the capacity right now to really, they recognize there's all sorts of tracking and reports that we want to be presenting to council on an annual, semi-annual basis. But at this point, I mean, the amount of work to just keep these plans plugged in and keep the bills and lights on is really taking up an extraordinary amount of their time. So absolutely support going forward and having someone with some dedicated time to set up these tools and to keep monitoring them, because also setting up a ratio doesn't do any good if no one's actually keeping an eye on that ratio on a regular basis.
Any other questions? Councilor Miller?
Just a couple things going over the whole report. As far as the hospital reserve goes, I think it's a great idea rather than a commitment. It is what it is, but the county still controls it. I do think we need language around if the hospital doesn't go forward. Stranger things have happened. Second thing, yeah, I wanted to, and you touched on it, another request for another from the financial staff, and getting back to the or bringing into this discussion the grants and outsourcing that. I like the idea of outsourcing for no other reason than the fact that it's only 0.5% of the budget, but it seems to take up about 5% of your budget. So I thought that was a good idea. So I am concerned about how lean that department is, and we know we cannot and should not have a lean financial department. So I will support anything you can do to fix that. So thank you.
Any other questions? I think I have a couple of things that are on my mind. The other day in camera, I mentioned that this is coming to the end of a year, and it would be nice to enter a new year with less things on our mind. And with that being said, Councillor Coleman brought up a couple of really good points that this budget, we're assuming this is with everything being right, and we're moving forward with everything being right, but everything isn't right in the county of Brant right now. We do have roads that need to be open. People are very patient. And this is something that other wards won't even know about. But I go to events everywhere and I see it, and I'm asked about it, and then I'm explained why it is. And there are roads that need to be opened in there. There are all kinds of funny little things that need to be corrected in the county. There are houses falling into the river. Councillor Coleman said so. I've seen them. We've had staff try to design a park, and we had to put off all that time we put into designing that park, which was going to be exactly what that community needed. Just fell apart because all of a sudden 2 houses are falling into the river, and we can't use one of our roads, and people are now using it as a dump and all kinds of things. So we can't assume that everything is perfect in the county of Brant. Not that I think any of you think it is, but we have very expensive things that we have to take care of before we can move on. We talk about things that we're not going to expect that are going to come to the county, and we better have some money to pay for it. We better have some money to pay for the things like houses falling into the river that have been falling into the river for more than 20 minutes. I'm talking years, and it's holding up other things in that community because we just haven't done it yet. And I'm not sure why we haven't done it yet, but I'm sure after this meeting I'm going to find out. But I'm just saying that there are such big pieces of the county that are just needing to be fixed. And I think if we go to every ward, we'll find something that should have been done maybe a couple of years ago, and we just didn't do it. So to think that we're waiting for something to throw us off or throw our numbers off or mess up our budget, we should really go back and consider how much stuff we have to do and how much that's all going to cost us. And it almost should be a budget line because it needs to be done. Those people expect it. I went to an event. Someone said, "When's my road going to be opened?" I don't know. Didn't really know it was closed. But then I found out all the particulars, and it's an expensive fix, or it would have been done. If it was a load of gravel or a truck of asphalt, it would have been done because that's the way we deal with things in the county of Brant. We fix the things that need to be fixed. This is a big problem. And it's an expensive problem, but those people have been very patient. So without wandering too far off what we're doing here today, I just wanted to let you know that we're not starting at ground zero here. We have things that we need to fix, very expensive things that we need to consider before we can go somewhere else. So if there's no other questions, thank you for your report. It's a good report. And Councillor McAlpine, you're going to speak to this report?
Okay, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Howes that staff report RPT 0517-23 long-term financial plan, initial presentation and next steps be received as information. 2, that any direction council may have on matters contained within this report are to inform the long-term financial plan document be put forward through resolution. 3, and the staff be directed to proceed with the next steps for long-term financial plan, including council and public engagement sessions.
Any questions before we call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried, which takes us to number 5, which is in camera. We have nothing right now to go in camera 4, which takes us to number 6, which is the, we're going to adjourn this meeting and reconvene on Wednesday, January the 31st. And that's it. Oh, and I'm just been asked to announce that there's a lunch that's here, supposedly behind door number 1 for the consultants. And you're welcome to join us. And for those that we won't see before Christmas, Merry Christmas from myself and council. Thank you for all the hard work you've done for us.